think she swears.
Welcome, everyone. We are going live, and hello, Mary Claire and Jean Gooding. We've got some great people coming along, and Elizabeth Mellows. I'm just going to wait for everyone to come into the Zoom room before we start, because we don't want to miss anything. We don't want you to miss anything important. In the meantime, I'm just going to say that this is a Guild and Foresight webinar, which you will hear more about in a moment from Georgie Brooks, a Guild member and head of the Foresight Initiative. And she will be introducing Susan, our speaker, in a moment as well. But we're just waiting for everyone to join us. We've got a lovely group of Guild members. We've got Vic in. We've got people from the States logging in. We've got people from St. John, Canada, Australia, and Scotland, the Strudwick, Sue Strudwick. So we're super excited about everyone logging in. It's really nice to get the St. John family back together again. We are obviously during this webinar during some very traumatic times at the moment in the region where St. John Eye Hospital operates. We are fundraising specifically as the Guild for St. John Eye Hospital in Gaza. We are going to be sharing an update with you as well in a moment, so you can hear a bit more about that. I'm going to be posting links in the chat box that are relevant to this talk. So how to donate to our Gaza appeal to help for, we're fundraising for salaries for the operating theaters, nurses and staff members that keep the operating theaters in Gaza going, and also links to St. John International, as well as a new initiative by the Fundraising and Marketing Office in London for St. John Eye Hospital. They are going to be sharing weekly bulletins about what is going on in the areas that we're operating and with the Gaza hospital in particular during this time of heightened crisis, I shall call it. So we've got everyone in the room, I think, and we are just about ready to start. So I will just say that we are going to be taking questions after Susan's talk. So please do share any questions that you have in the chat box. And we will be doing some a Q&A at the end with Georgie and Susan. If you've got any questions about the Guild or St. John Eye Hospital, we'll also hopefully be able to answer those as well between us all. So any questions, pop them in the chat box. I always say that the speakers, Georgie and Susan, they won't be looking at the chat box because they're going to be focusing on presenting to you. But I do share the chat box with them afterwards. So any comments, any questions that we don't get through, they will be able to read them afterwards. So please do feel free to leave any comments in there for them as well. So I will be popping back after the presentations to do the Q&A. But for now, I'm going to hand over to you, Georgie.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you for that lovely opening. On behalf of the Guild and Foresight members of the St. John Eye Hospital Group, I'd like to welcome you all to our first online talk in a while, and thank you for joining. Our special guest this evening is Susan le Jeune, appointed as the first female Secretary General of St. John International in 2021, who's kindly agreed to talk about her career in the diplomatic service, followed by a review of the current work of St. John International and the Order worldwide, and how this links back to St. John's roots. Her presentation will last for about 20 minutes, after which there'll be, as Diana mentioned, a Q&A, which she'll be moderating. So do post any questions in the chat box. So before I hand over to Susan, I'd like to read you a brief update on the situation at the hospitals and clinics as of the 8th of November. As Diana mentioned, there's a new weekly bulletin that's being created by the St. John Fundraising Office in London, and we will put a link in the chat box. Right. Since the beginning of the recent conflict, the Israeli military has ordered all hospitals in the Gaza Strip to evacuate. Today, many of the hospitals remain operational, but many have sustained considerable damage, including the government eye hospital. To the best of our knowledge, there's been no further damage to our hospital building in Gaza, though we have not been able to carry out further inspections. All St. John Gazan staff are residing in Rafah and other southern districts, though it's worth mentioning that we've not been able to contact them all due to the electricity and communications difficulties. 4 of our doctors are volunteering at local hospitals, providing both ophthalmic and general emergency services to war casualties. In Jerusalem Hospital, the clinical activity is currently at around 65% of normal activity, with more patients being able to attend for surgery in recent weeks. This has been made possible through collaboration with Israeli authorities and the East Jerusalem Hospital Network. Our outreach visits have grown back to 75% capacity, and our Hebron Hospital is operating at almost 100% outpatient and surgical capacity. In Anabta, workload rates fluctuate between 50 and 60%. The Eye Hospital is preparing plans of action to respond in due course to the needs of those impacted by the current crisis, particularly those in displaced communities. In the immediate term, we continue to offer more complex treatments in our regional clinics and are seeking to expand the scope of current services in Hebron and East Jerusalem. We'll put up the links to the dedicated space where you can get weekly updates. And as Dee mentioned, the Guild is continuing to raise money for the nursing salaries at Gaza and the pediatric unit and the operating. So I'm going to hand over now to Susan. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me. I just wanted to start by saying that obviously what's going on in Palestine is really difficult, and I want to pay tribute to Ahmed in particular and his staff for the amazing work that they continue to do in circumstances which I think for most of us are just almost impossible to imagine. We're obviously in regular contact with him, but things are really very tough, worse than he has ever seen it, I think. I said I'd talk a little bit about what I did before I came to work for St. John, so I'll try and just do a very, very quick canter through a career that lasted for 36 years. I joined the Foreign Office in 1985, straight from university. Nobody in my family had ever done anything like it before. I studied French literature at university, and as part of that I spent some time living in France, and I decided that whatever I did as a career, I wanted to be able to live overseas, live and work overseas, to really get to know countries better than if you just visit as a tourist. I never expected to be successful when I applied for the diplomatic service, but I joined immediately the September after I graduated, and I served in countries starting with Belgium, then Singapore, Venezuela, Colombia, the United States, then Vienna, Austria, briefly in France, and finished up as High Commissioner in Canada. In between, I spent time in London, including qualifying with a professional qualification in human resources, and did a spell, 5 years as the Foreign Office's HR director, looking after our 15,000 staff across the world, from Fiji to Argentina, with a proportion of those diplomats, but many of them locally engaged staff recruited in country. Nobody in my family had ever done anything like it before. I think my grandparents in particular were bamboozled by the idea that A, a woman could be a diplomat, and B, that I could be a diplomat. When I first started, there were very few senior women in the Foreign Office at all. When I finished, there were female ambassadors or high commissioners in every single one of the major posts. So Washington, Paris, Germany, Beijing, Canada, where I was, Italy, the United Nations, NATO, Japan, and there's one other which I've forgotten, but every single one of those really big jobs was done by a female. New York is the other one, a female ambassador, which would have been impossible even to contemplate when I first joined the Foreign Office. And so I've done a lot of things for the first time. I was the first woman to be ambassador in Vienna. I was also the first female High Commissioner in Canada. And as Georgie said, I'm the first woman to do the job in St. John as well. What does a diplomat actually do? I think for many people it's quite difficult to imagine a life where you're sent abroad to represent your country. And I think there are two aspects of it, really. First of all, if you're a good diplomat, what you are is the eyes and ears of your host, your sending country, so in my case the United Kingdom, in the country to which you're sent. And that means really understanding the country where you are working, getting to know the people, getting to know the background, and being able to provide London with information that goes beyond what you can read in the newspapers or see on the television. And I think that is that's the difference between being a good diplomat and being a bad diplomat. And you also have to be able to turn your hand to a huge range of things, from economic reporting to some quite sensitive security and intelligence type work, to the highly political, giving advice on whether various ministers are worth talking to and trying to secure conversations for your ministers and your prime minister with senior politicians from your host country, commercial stuff, so making sure that British companies are in with a good shout of getting big contracts, defense relations, science and innovation, increasingly really important. In Canada, we did a lot of work on artificial intelligence. And finally, and possibly for most of you, the most important thing is looking after British citizens, but particularly British tourists who visit the country where you are posted. I have done all of those things in various in every job I've done. And the other thing that an ambassador does, not the rest of the staff so much, is engaging with the local press and media. So being the very much public face of the United Kingdom for the people of the country where you are living and working. As I say, I've done all of those things. Some of them are easier than others, and actually very often the most challenging things that a diplomat has to do is the consular work, because that usually involves dealing with people who are in difficulty, and some of those are very tough and very challenging situations, and I'll talk about one in particular of those that I dealt with when I was in Colombia. I think the other thing about the diplomatic service is that it is his or her, when I was working, Her Majesty's diplomatic service. So it is a different thing from being a civil servant. You're a crown servant and you work to represent the Queen or the King. I think that's really special. And the Queen, when I was in the office, and the King still does, receives every single ambassador who is posted, or high commissioner who is posted overseas, for a private audience, and talks to each one of us for 15-20 minutes about the country we're going to, and sharing, in the Queen's case, her memories, experience of the country where you're going to. And when I was having bad days, and obviously there were bad days, I would always remind myself that I was there to represent that incredible woman, and I would recall the conversations that I had had with her about the country where I was posted, and I found that an incredibly motivating thing and a very inspiring thing, actually. I'm going to now talk a little bit about, to give you some examples about what it's like to be a diplomat based on things that I did. I think the most important thing about the difference between being a diplomat and being a run-of-the-mill civil servant is that diplomacy, if you're going to do it properly, really is a 24/7, 52 weeks a year job. Particularly if you're an ambassador, you have to be a public figure. People have to know who you are, so that means that you're recognized. You live in a house that is provided by the government, and you have to use that house as a platform for presenting the best of the UK. So there is never a day off, really, unless you leave the country. As I say, if you're doing your job properly, particularly if you're in a small capital like Ottawa, people will recognize you. So it's very difficult, actually, to ever properly let your hair down. At the same time, the job offers incredible opportunities for meeting and engaging with some extraordinary people. And I'll give you a few examples of that in a minute. So I'm going to run through 2 or 3 things that I think sum up what the job was for me. The first example is when I was in Canada, when British Aerospace Systems were trying to get a contract for the huge contract to build the next generation of Canada's fighting ships. Massive contract, billions of pounds of business. And I know these things are really important. I'm not an expert in shipbuilding or in many defence matters, but the government and the company relied on advice from me to ensure that their approach to the negotiations and how they presented themselves was correct for Canada. And that was particularly challenging because the same company had won a huge contract in Australia not long before. And the approach with the Australians wouldn't have worked in Canada. So I had to try to ensure that BAE staff and negotiators and our own ministers were aware of the differences and didn't stymie their chances of winning this massive contract by using an approach which would not have been appropriate in the Canadian context. So you have to be quite careful that you don't tell people what to do, but you have to be in a subtle way try and guide them towards the right outcome. And in that case, we were successful because the company got the contract, and it was a huge achievement, not just for me but for the whole team. One of the things about being an ambassador is that you will have people in your team who represent the whole of the British government. So I had defence staff from, I had an army and a navy attaché who were able to help me with some of the more technical details, and obviously ministers from the Ministry of Defence were involved in negotiating with their Canadian counterparts. And I had commercial people on my team who were much more au fait with the procurement rules in Canada. But that was just an example of how you have to know when to intervene and how to intervene in order to get the right outcome. The second example happened when I was in Colombia, and despite what you might think, Colombia, for myself and my family who were with me, not just in Colombia but everywhere we went, was the most extraordinary experience for all of us. We loved it, loved every minute of it. But we were there from 2002 to 2005, and it was still a very dangerous country. While I was there, on a night when my ambassador, I was the deputy ambassador in Colombia, and on the night that my ambassador had just left for a 2-month holiday in Australia, I got a call to say that there had been a kidnapping, and they thought that 2 Brits were amongst the people who had been taken. Indeed, they were. They were taken by a left-wing rebel group in a very isolated part of the country, in an archaeological site up near the Caribbean coast. And I spent 3 months not sleeping very well, not knowing what the next telephone call was going to be, trying to ensure that the Colombian government didn't try to go and rescue the hostages, because that invariably didn't end well. Trying to understand what the hostage takers were after. They actually had political demands rather than financial ones, which made life slightly easier for us. But an added complexity was that the 2 Brits were part of a group of people who included Israelis, a German, and a Spanish girl as well. So it was an unusual group. One of the Brits was actually released early on, but the rest of them were held for nearly 3 months, and they were released on 2 days before Christmas. And actually, that's the only time I've ever been on the Today programme, because they were waiting outside the ambassador's house to find out that they had actually been released. I mean, it was an extraordinary, challenging, and in the end, a very satisfying thing to have been involved in, but it was extremely difficult. Regular meetings with very senior people in the Colombian government. We were also in very close contact with the Catholic Church, who were involved in negotiating with the hostage takers, the kidnappers, to try and ensure that we understood what they wanted, and that their demands, which were not excessive at all, were met. And we were also able to help the particular Catholic priest who was doing the negotiations by giving him some communications equipment, which allowed him to stay in touch with us and with the kidnappers. So a really challenging thing to do, and that's when your duty obligation to look after British tourists overseas really comes into sharp focus, the lovely thing about that story is that the guy who was held for nearly 3 months, Simon Henderson, made a film about his experience, and I was actually able to go to a showing of his film and remind him of when we'd met the last time in the ambassador's residence in Bogota. So it was a great end to the story, but it could have ended very, very differently. And all the time that they were held, I was half expecting a telephone call because I was in charge for the whole period they were held. When they eventually were released, I went on holiday and slept for a whole week almost without interruption, because it was quite a challenging and demanding thing to have done. The great thing as well was that I had a fantastic team, again, working with me in the embassy, from our intelligence staff to our military staff, to the consular people who kept in touch with the families. I mean, the worst thing about the worst moment almost of the whole thing was when I got a telephone call from the cousin of one of the people who was one of the Brits who was kidnapped, saying, "It's my cousin. They've got, I don't know how she got hold of me. It's my cousin, isn't it?" And I just had to say yes. I felt I couldn't not tell her what was going on. That was a very, very difficult moment. The third example I wanted to give you was when I was in Vienna, where I was ambassador to Austria, but also to the United Nations organizations there. And I was involved in the team. I was part of the team that negotiated the nuclear agreement with the Iranians, which led to significant constraints being placed on their nuclear program, and which significantly delayed or extended the time it would take them to acquire nuclear weapons. That was again, an incredibly satisfying experience, because we got an agreement at the end of it, working with 5 other countries and the European Union, and on the other side, the Iranians. Incredible mixture of highly technical, really sensitive negotiations. So I had to learn a lot about how you build a nuclear bomb, essentially, but also understanding the different perspectives of the 6 countries involved, because obviously the Chinese and the Russians had a very different view to us. Interestingly, the Russians invaded Crimea when we were in the middle of these negotiations, and we were able to continue because I think both sides felt at that point that the end game was more important. It was so important that we couldn't pause or stop the negotiations because of what the Russians had done in Crimea. But it was an interesting that was an interesting element. I'll give you a small anecdote about some of the more light-hearted moments. I was given 24 hours notice to organise a lunch for 4 of the 5 or 5 of the 6 foreign ministers who were involved in this negotiation. The Europeans, the Americans, and the European Union representative. It was on a Sunday, and in Vienna, all the shops are shut on Saturdays and Sundays. So it was quite a challenge logistically to get the lunch together. I had US Secret Service men crawling all over my house, checking things out. But we did ask people what they did and didn't eat. It's polite. And most of them, apart from, obvious for somebody who was Jewish, we had to be very careful about what they didn't eat. And similarly, somebody else didn't eat seafood. But from the French, I got a 3.5-page email detailing exactly what the then French foreign minister liked and didn't like, down to he likes Bordeaux better than Burgundy. He likes things that taste of rum, but he doesn't eat rum, he doesn't drink rum, and so on and so on. It was, I do have a copy of it somewhere, which when I write my memoirs, I am sure I will put into it. That was an extraordinary experience, and as I say, that's a rare example these days of diplomacy having actually achieved something and being successful. And I think it for me, it underlined one of the key characteristics of a successful diplomat, which is optimism. You have to, if you're going to be a good diplomat, you have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to believe that things can get better, because otherwise, what is the point of doing what we do? Some of the other things I think that make a good diplomat are an ability to listen, because you can't be on transmit the whole time. You have to pick up information and pick up sometimes things that people don't say, as well as things people do say. And you have to be interested in other people and interested in other countries. So a sort of intellectual and personal curiosity. I think you have to be obviously adaptable and flexible, because when you uproot yourself every 5 or 6 years and go somewhere, or less than that, 3 or 4 years, go somewhere new, that's can be quite challenging. I think you really have to believe in public service, because that's what it is. You certainly don't do it for the money. You have to be able to communicate, including tough messages sometimes, and I think have some pretty high levels of resilience, including sometimes being bawled out by your hosts. And that happened to me twice, once in Canada over a trade issue, and once in Vienna on the day after the Brexit vote. And you just have to sit and take it, and also learn that it's not personal. And the final thing is about leading and developing a team, because you have a small or large team of people, but you are very much on your own there, and it can be quite lonely sometimes, because you're a very public figure. Your bosses can be halfway around the world, and it can feel quite isolated. And obviously some of those things are things that the Order of St. John thought it needed when I was recruited. In some ways it's a very similar job, except that I'm sitting in the head office rather than out in one of the embassies, if you like. My team is very small. There are 10 or 11 of us, at least 1 or 2 of whom work part-time. We provide guidance and strategic direction for the Order of St. John in the 44 countries where we are represented. But all those establishments are independent of us. We have relationships with them, but we can't tell them what to do. We have to convince them or sometimes encourage them to do things. We don't have any formal way of telling them or forcing them to do things. We also need to ensure that we're all going in the same direction. That doesn't mean we all do exactly the same things at the same time. And the form of our service to the communities where we are can differ according to the countries where we are represented. But at the heart of it is this idea of being rooted in our communities to provide first aid and healthcare, community healthcare, paramedic services in many places to everybody who needs it. And that's where it links right back to the origins of St. John, where the Hospitallers would treat anybody who came to them. And it also links to what's going on currently in Palestine, where the Eye Hospital treats everybody who comes through its doors. It doesn't matter what your religion or your race is, or even if you're able to pay, we will treat you. And I think it's really important that we remember that, because it is one of the things that makes us really special. It's one of the things that makes us different from some of our counterparts. And the other thing, obviously, that makes us very different is the fact that we are fundamentally, not everybody, but there's a huge chunk of the service that we give that is delivered by our volunteers. There are obviously professional medical staff in many places too. But I think, although sometimes it felt as if I was a volunteer, given how little I was paid when I was in the diplomatic service, that is a different sort of organisation, and it has its own challenges. So as well as that strategic guidance and the policies and the direction that we set for the Order as a whole, my team provides a secretariat function for the 4 great officers. So that's the Lord Prior, the Sub-Prior, the Prelate, and the Chancellor. And the Chancellor and 1 member of my team look after all matters to do with honours, awards, our trademarks, and our intellectual property. So that's our logo and things like that, to make sure that it's not being abused by anybody. We have a small budget. We are funded partly by donation, but more importantly by subscriptions paid by the priories. The 11 priories give us an annual subscription, but the budget is small. And our strategy, which was adopted before I joined, but is obviously at the heart of what I'm there to do, is that we want to be leaders in first aid and community healthcare, and we want to deliver those services to the same level of excellence wherever we are. Now, at the moment, I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say that St. John delivers to the same level. Everywhere we are, there are some places where we just are outstandingly good, and not necessarily in the places where you might think. I mean, Papua New Guinea, we run the ambulance service, and it is a fully operational, highly professional, excellent ambulance service in the most challenging circumstances you can imagine. But there are other parts of the world where that is not the case. Nobody is doing anything that is bad, but there is a lot more that we can do. And one of the things that my team is working very hard on is to provide the tools for some of the smaller parts of our organisation and the advice and the guidance to help them build up their capacity and their capability to deliver the most excellent services. And we do that through a regional structure which breaks up the world into three chunks, and where the priories play a key role in providing advice, help and guidance to the smaller associations in their region. And all that is underpinned by our values, which again take us back to where we came from, where our roots are. We have our roots in a Christian organisation, quite clearly, but we are very clear that we are open to people of all faiths and none. And I think, again, that's a very important differentiation between us and some of our fellow orders. I was really happy that in the procession, the formal procession at the Queen's funeral, Mark Compton, the Lord Prior, was joined by not only by Ahmed from the Eye Hospital, but also a young volunteer from the northeast of England, who is herself a Muslim. And I think it was very important that we showed that we are a very inclusive organisation. I think it's a very important part of who we are and what we stand for. I never thought I would find myself doing something like this. I had taken the decision to leave the diplomatic service. This job came looking for me. It has been absolutely fantastic. In my old job, I met some incredible people. Every day there would be somebody who would just blow me away. Some of whom were just some of my own personal heroes. I got to meet Margaret Atwood when I was in Canada. I met the artist Edmund de Waal when I was in Austria, and he opened an exhibition that he gave there. I organised a visit for the current Prince and Princess of Wales when I was in Paris. Obviously, when I was in Canada, I met Justin Trudeau, and I met my own personal hero Sting twice in the course of my job. But I would say that many of the people I have met in the 2 years I've been in this job have been even more impressive than those. People are committed, selfless, professional, and totally inspiring. So I can't think of any job that could give me more satisfaction than what I'm doing now. And I'm just very happy that by a combination of circumstances, this is what I am doing now and hope to be doing for the next few years. So I think that's more than enough. And I will now, if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to try to answer any questions.
Susan, that was fascinating. Just going to bring Georgie back. That was so interesting to hear. Lovely to get a more detailed bio and learn more about the work of St. John International and what the role is. It can be quite a confusing
it is.
So it's really nice to hear it from your point of view, and to learn a bit more about you. So we've got some great questions coming in. So there's still time to pop any questions you have in the chat box. So please do that. We've had a few coming in. We've had one from Mary Claire Boyle, who some of the attendees might remember, and George, you remember, worked with me in the office when I was based in the London office, working a lot on our social media. So it's not a surprise that her question is regarding that, but super, I would be very interested to hear the answer. She asks, do you think the landscape of diplomacy has changed since the rise of social media and the polarization of politics that has happened as a result?
Yeah, I think it has. I think there's a danger that diplomats can get drawn into very quick sort of attention grabbing. I mean, Twitter is the medium that diplomats use more than any other, I think, in the social media space, and it doesn't always lend itself to careful, considered diplomacy. You know, it can be a fantastic tool, and I used to use it a lot. But I think the danger is that you can get drawn into spats with people. I think but you can also trivialize the profession. I mean, it's a serious job being a diplomat, and I don't think that. I mean, I can say this now because I'm no longer one, but I don't think it's appropriate for diplomats to tweet pictures of their breakfast and stuff like that. You know, the head of BP wouldn't do that. So, but there's a constant pressure to be, you know, to increase the number of people who are following you and get more likes, and the sort of thing that get the sort of things that get likes are pictures of fluffy cats, you know, and I don't think that those two things necessarily sit very comfortably together. I think on the polarization of politics, I think diplomats can be sidelined by that. And I think, you know, because our job is not about the sort of the populism and some of those extremes, we can get sidelined because our job is to find compromises and to find agreements. So the sort of very shouty nature of populist politics is not great. And interestingly, when I was in Canada, my American counterpart was a Trump appointee, and so she got drawn into a lot of that stuff. But it effectively meant she couldn't do her job because she was seen very much as being on that side, and you know she was ostracized, and people didn't invite her, and she was not a player, which is great for me because it left more space for me. But I think it is. I think it is not in the nature of diplomacy to find that very polarized politics easy to operate within or among.
Thanks for that. We've got a question from Sarah Jane Holden, who is the chair of the Guild. She says, we're delighted to hear that you're committed to a couple more years at the Order. Which area will be your priority for the Order in those years?
So the big thing that we are currently working on is to try and establish a baseline to understand and to get to know better exactly what it looks like in every single one of our organizations, because we don't really have that basic knowledge. And that will allow us then to see where and how we can provide the assistance and support to allow those, the less highly functioning or the less developed parts of our organization to get better. So to increase the scope and scale of what we're doing, I'm not talking about opening lots of new St. John's anywhere, because I don't think we're ready for that yet. And the other two things are to invest in the future leadership of the Order. So we're launching a leadership program. So we'll be spotting talent and giving them the opportunity to learn and develop in order to identify potential candidates for some of the really big jobs in the future. Never done it before. I think it's really important, both in terms of recognizing and valuing the people we've got with us, but also in terms of making sure that we've got that pipeline of talent for the future. And the final thing, and this is a sort of slightly longer term thing, is to establish ourselves more firmly as an international organization. Everybody knows where there is St. John about their local St. John. So, people in this country know about St. John Ambulance. I think very few of them would know that there's also a St. John in Fiji or Malawi. And one of the things that the team and I are trying to do is to to develop the story so that we can tell the story more widely about us as an international organization. Like, I mean, we're not as big as the Red Cross, but, you know, we're similar to the Red Cross and everybody knows what they do everywhere. So that's the third part.
Well, sounds like you're going to be busy.
Yep.
Yeah, well, best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And I think I speak for everyone here that, you know, we are very excited about everything you just said there. So we're going to move on to a bit of politics from Sarah Jane again. How would you see the steps to be taken if there's to be a long-term resolution to the two-state ideal as suggested by President Biden in Israel, the West Bank, Gaza?
I think that has to be the ultimate goal. But I think what's lacking at the moment is the sort of political leadership on both sides and the political courage to take some difficult steps that is inevitable when you try and approach a problem which is as complex and ancient and emotive as this. And so I've got experience. I had experience in Colombia of a sort of the first phase of the resolution of a long conflict. Obviously different reasons for it, but the people who initially said, yes, we are going to sit down and talk about this were incredibly brave people, and they were people of a certain stature. And I don't think at the moment, I can't see anybody on the world stage who has that stature. And I would say the same about what happened in this country when the Northern Ireland peace process started. It took incredible courage, political courage, for the people concerned to say, I will sit down and talk to the other side here, because they felt that it was a risk worth taking because of the future. And to be quite honest with you, I don't see that happening at the moment. So I think what's lacking is political leadership, really strong political leadership.
Yeah, thanks for that. I agree. Within the region and internationally, sadly. We've had a few different questions and people asking questions about the mother and baby unit.
Yeah.
So if you could let me know, if you could tell us where the mother and baby units are operating, yeah, and how many mothers are you supporting annually? Have you got some figures for us?
I don't have any figures, but I can tell you that they're in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Uganda. It's an incredibly successful program, and across the range of UN indicators for maternal and child health, those programs have made a significant difference in each of those countries. In Malawi, we are supported by the Scottish government, who give us a grant every year and that's allowed us to expand the program there. We're also, I hope, fingers crossed, about to expand the program in Zimbabwe. And the reason that we're able to do that is because we have fantastic schemes for assessing the impact or measuring the impact of what we're doing. I mean, it's fairly basic stuff, and it's delivered by volunteers, but it means women are going to their antenatal appointments. And then they have follow-up appointments after they've had their children. And I mean, for me, the thing I think is almost the most impressive about it is that the fathers are also involved in the process. So it's as well as the sort of medical health elements, it also has a real societal impact. And it's fantastic. At the moment, we only do it in those 4 countries. And you know, it's an expensive program, so we need to have the funds to keep it going. But the other thing, which is absolutely fantastic about it, is that it's not run by anybody in the UK. You know, the teams on the ground design, deliver, monitor, evaluate the programs that they're delivering, which I think is so important, because it's a much more sophisticated and appropriate way of providing those interventions in the communities, because they are done by communities, with communities, for communities.
Phenomenal work. So I am going to be wrapping this session up in a minute, but I do just want to say that the Guild have got a series of events between now and the end of the year. So please do check out the website. I've just posted a link for the upcoming events. We've got a seasonal concert on the 7th of December at the Priory Church. It's followed by a reception. So please do have a little look. We've got some amazing things. We've got the choir of St. Cuthbert's. We've got Dame Vanessa Redgrave reading, reciting for us. So it's going to be absolutely wonderful. Followed, like I said, by champagne and canapé reception. We've got an online auction as well, which we're super excited about. We've done this a few times now. I think this was our third one. It will be starting on the 26th of November until the 10th of December. We've got some phenomenal prizes already. We've got some Jon Snow's ties. We've got lunches at different members clubs. We've got a bunch of really exciting holidays, fishing opportunities, all kinds of stuff. So do keep an eye out for that. And we're also going to be having an online marketplace. So we are not doing the Gift of Sight Fair in the same way in person at Chelsea Old Town Hall this year. So instead, we're going to have an online marketplace where some of our supporters, some of our sponsor stall holders, shall we say, will be advertising their websites, and yes, we'll be benefiting from that. So please do keep an eye out on the website, keep an eye out for the emails, do share any of these things with anyone you think would be interested in, you know, if the auction prizes, if you know a friend who might be interested in bidding on something, please do share it, because we want to get a bit of a buzz around the auction and the concert and everything. So please do help be ambassadors of our work as well. We're recording this session, so we're going to be sharing it on our website, as well as making some little teasers, sound bites as well to share on social media. So again, share it with the St. John family and beyond. But I am going to just wrap up. I was fortunate enough to go back home to Palestine, to Jerusalem recently. I actually went on the 7th of October, which was possibly the most awkward date to go back home to visit family. But during a quiet time, I managed to go and visit the eye hospital in Jerusalem. And it's always just so invigorating going out and seeing the work that they're doing and under incredible conditions, incredible in a bad way, because I can't imagine how difficult it is to run a hospital anyways on a normal day, but then with all of the restrictions and obstacles that they face. And again, it was a time of heightened crisis, but it was just amazing. And they're all so grateful for all the work that we do in raising awareness about their work and fundraising for their work all around the world through the St. John family. So I just wanted to ask, have you managed to go out and visit yet, Susan, or do you have plans to?
I was there last September. And so we visited not only the hospital, we went out to Anabta and another a mobile clinic in one of the villages, which was, and we met the mayor there, and he told us about, you know, the constant harassment that they were suffering. And then we went to the site of the new clinic in Nablus. So yeah, I saw it firsthand, and I saw what it's like to live there. And you know, however much you've read about it and you've heard about it, actually seeing what it's like on the ground, it was, I mean, for me, it was a bit like a punch in the gut sometimes, but also you know, meeting those incredible people was just, I mean, it was, you're right, it's uplifting and at the same time incredibly depressing, but you know, without people like you and the Guild, they wouldn't be able to do it. So it is, you know, it is so important to maintain our support. The one thing I would say though is I've actually spent quite a lot of my time in the last month making sure that when people talk about the hospital and our activities there, they don't say things that would be actually unhelpful to the team. Because at times like this, the words we use, the language we use, how we describe things, you know, images that we repost or whatever, could be actually dangerous for some of the people who are working there. So we've had to be quite tough and try to control it in a way which is not really normal for St. John, but it is so important, because what we don't want to do is inadvertently give anybody the impression that we are not an apolitical objective organisation who is there to serve everybody, and that we are taking sides, one side or the other, which could give somebody who wanted to the excuse to significantly hamper our ability to deliver our services in the future. So it's tough, but it's important that we don't. I mean, those of us who want to help do things that are actually helpful, not things that could make things worse.
And speaking on social media, the amount of misinformation that needs to be filtered through, especially during these heightened emotional times, super important.
Yeah, so we direct everybody back to the St. John Weekly Bulletin. I think Dee's kindly put up a link there, which is a new communique from the Eye Hospital and the London Fundraising Office. And there's a link here for a new weekly bulletin, which will give information updated, I think, directly from Jerusalem and all of the hospitals about the how they're operating and what the operation capacity is at any given time. So that's our main portal. And for anyone who wants to join the mailing list, that's on the St. John Eye Hospital website. That will keep you in touch. And we put up the Guild link as well to all of our events. We're supporting Gaza this year. We have an annual commitment, and we decide in January each year who we're going to support. But thank you very much, Susan. It's a really, really fascinating talk. Thank you to everyone who's come and the really great questions. It's really good to have an online talk again and hear about your work and your previous career. And thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Susan.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye, everyone.